I'm Kate Nash, writer and founder of Purple Space. We are delighted to collaborate with MSD, known as Merck, in the US and Canada on this Authenticity series, a collection of 7 conversations with extraordinary colleagues about their experiences of disability and work. It can be difficult to work for a large corporation and talk about your disability experience. That's true in the pharmaceutical industry and indeed across the full range of organisations that we work with at Purple Space. In publishing these conversations, MSD wants to help normalise the experience of disability by sharing the stories of colleagues with both direct and indirect experience of disability. In so doing, MSD aims to help colleagues with disabilities and allies to build resilience and trust, to make it easier for them to share their stories and, when it is required, request the adjustments or the accommodations they need to thrive. In this conversation, we meet Alyssa Kobela. Alyssa started her career at Merck, known as MSD, outside of the United States and Canada, in the laboratory as an analytical chemist. She transitioned to her current role, where she works on bringing important medications to market through executing strategy and delivering regulatory filings for increasingly complex new small molecules. In 2018, Alyssa was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and in 2023, her son, then 2.5 years old, was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. These experiences had a profound effect in order to advocate for lasting and wide-reaching change. Alyssa joined the executive leadership team of the Capability Network, which is one of the 10 employee business resource groups at Merck. In her spare time, Alyssa is an ambassador for Mission Stadiums for Multiple Sclerosis, a non-profit MS organisation that aims to spread awareness, support clinical research, and support families directly impacted by MS. You can find her most days in the gym, training for adaptive CrossFit, where she is reigning 2024 fittest on earth in the neuromuscular minor division, or spending time with her husband, Chris, and their young son. We offer our thanks to Alyssa for sharing her story of disability and work so that others might learn from her experiences and insights. I hope you enjoy listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Alyssa, absolutely lovely to see you again. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and I'm also very excited to talk to you, Kate. It's good to see you again.
Wonderful. And remind our audience where you're dialing in from today. I'm dialing in from the UK.
I'm in Pennsylvania in the USA.
Great. Hope your weather is as beautiful as it is today, although you're in grey, so maybe not.
Yeah, it's actually probably more like a traditional UK day here today. A little rainy, overcast, and colder than you would expect in May.
We have swapped. So, Alyssa, my kickoff question is about your diagnosis with MS. How has being diagnosed with MS affected your professional journey, your professional life?
Yeah, so I'll say when I first started at Merck almost 13 years ago now, I was very go-getter, say yes to everything and do everything, never say no to an opportunity. And, going through an MS diagnosis where a lot of it was fighting with providers, a lot of advocating for myself, not being heard or seen by providers, that and then the impacts of the actual symptoms for my diagnosis has changed the trajectory of my career. So I was in the labs at first, and when I was diagnosed, I had to actually go out on short-term disability. When I came back, my network of people that I had built, there was advice all over the spectrum, from saying things like, I wouldn't talk about it at work, like there's a stigma around it, to oh, we fully support you. So there was definitely a lot of opinions flying around. And the thing that I ended up picking up on and hearing the most was, hide my symptoms, hide my disease, don't talk about it, mask at work. So that definitely impacted the opportunities that I had professionally. And over time, and there was COVID in there was remote work in there. I had a child in those years right after being diagnosed. So in that time, I actually, it ended up starting to realize that my skills were kind of changing, and that I needed to find an opportunity at the company that matched more the skills that I was now developing. And so I ended up switching roles to doing something that I thought I'd be in the labs forever. I loved that at first, but then I just switched. Now I'm in regulatories, which is a lot of, I call it glorified paper pushing, and working with stakeholders around the area. But, getting my diagnosis has definitely changed the trajectory of what I originally thought my career would be.
Yeah. And as we've chatted through before, sometimes we do find ourselves in places and spaces that are good at the beginning of our career, but we have to sort of sometimes look up and over and across and see what else we can do so that we can deploy our skills effectively. And it's fantastic that you've been able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take us back a little bit, Alyssa. I know getting the diagnosis was difficult. What did you learn over that period? When you look back now, what were the things that you learned from the experience, and how has it helped you to become a better advocate, and the role that you play in the CAN network?
Yeah, so I alluded a little bit in my first response that I was unseen and unheard by doctors. So maybe I could give Anne a little anecdote here. When I first went to the hospital, it was because I suddenly couldn't see. I was 31 years old at the time with 20/20 vision my entire life. And suddenly I was having trouble reading my phone, seeing my husband's face, who is sitting right next to me. Doing my homework. I was working on my master's degree at the time, and I couldn't read my computer screen, and I was like, what is happening? And I also got the stereotypical, what they call an ice pick headache, which feels like an ice pick being driven through your eye and your head, and like a terrible, terrible headache. And so I ended up going to the emergency room, and the doctors there, the neurologist came in and was very dismissive of my symptoms. He said, you can see, you saw me walk in the room. The ophthalmologist said they didn't see anything in your eye, in your optic nerve. And that was just like looking through a magnifying glass into my eye. And I said, I'm telling you, I cannot see. And, tests later, they finally did an MRI, and they were like, oh, well, you do have a lesion on your optic nerve. You do have a lesion in another part of your brain, and you're looking at a possible MS diagnosis. And then the doctor goes, I've never actually seen an MS patient before. A neurologist in the hospital, never seen an MS patient before. It was a fight from just, again, when I asked to see a specialist, certain specialists, they were like, no, we have specialists in the hospital. So again, I had to sit there and fight for myself and for what I wanted and the healthcare that I wanted and the avenues that I wanted to pursue. And because of that, it taught me to be a better advocate, but not even just an advocate, to be a better listener. It made me realize that those doctors that were initially I had seen were not listening, and not like hearing my story. And they didn't hear that I had 20/20 vision my whole life. They were just came in and assumed that I saw them come in the room so I can see. I wasn't totally blind, but I could not see with the same acuity that I could the day before. And it's fortunate that I listened to my body, because there's others that are I was fortunate to get an MS diagnosis in less than a month from my first noticeable symptom. Others are not so lucky. There's others that have to fight and advocate and don't get diagnosed for years, because the symptoms are, oftentimes fatigue or joint pain, slight vision changes. I just picked up on it sooner than others do, and I was an advocate for myself. So because of all of that, I've become a much more empathetic listener, which I think and a better listener, which I think helps me in my job function when I have to work cross-functionally with large amounts of teams. And, if there's disagreements on ways to do things in the team or, things, I am much better at navigating those now. And I'm also a better advocate for if there is something that I see that I'm like, no, we really should do it this way. I've become a much better advocate. So if you think of the Merck enterprise leadership skills, the fact that I face this in my daily life, my personal life, it's carried over to my professional life and has made me a much better employee of the company because of it.
Wonderful. Alyssa, we see that time and time again, and, it's hard to hear, but your story is not unique, dare I say it, but how wonderful that you've been able to plough that into the executive role that you have within the CAN network. Let's build on that. Your thoughts about the things that organizations and managers can do to create a more inclusive and a more supportive environment for people with disabilities. What are your thoughts on that?
So I personally am in a group right now that every time we have a group meeting, we do an inclusion moment. So we focus on some kind of diverse aspect. There was one that I learned a whole bunch about Diwali, which is a holiday, an Indian holiday. And then, there's other times where I come and I'll talk about my MS. And, so we are that within that group that I have, we are consistently talking about different dimensions of diversity. So people in the group know that they can come and talk openly and it's a safe space. So I think that's one great way just to incorporate a 5-minute into your group meeting. Sometimes there's groups meet daily depending on what their job functions are. So if you can take 2 minutes to do an inclusion, maybe it's an awareness day that day. Hey, today is Autism Awareness Day or whatever. That's a great way to do that. And then for leaders to really show vulnerability and be willing to share a little bit about themselves, I think it helps make them seem more human. And when you can make yourself seem more human to your employees are now more comfortable and feel more comfortable asking for things that they need to do their jobs well. So I think that's would be my one recommendation, 2 recommendations, I guess I gave in there.
I love it, Alyssa. You touch on storytelling, which is such a powerful tool to drive systems change and culture change. It's as old as mankind. But also, and I've heard you in the past talk about don't hide your light. So encouraging others to share their story of difference. I expect you've seen lots of powerful stories within the business.
Many, many powerful stories. And the more we can share and, like you said, not hide our light, the more we'll reduce that stigma that still might exist or that fear of the difference, right? And a lot of times people don't even realize that they have that, and which is why we call it an unconscious bias, right? You don't realize that you have it, but because you grew up a certain way or you do certain things every day the same way, you just become accustomed to things. And it's not, for lack of better, it's not because you're not trying, you're intentionally being, biased, but it does exist. And I think the more we talk about these things and tell stories, it reduces that amount of unconscious bias that we still have. And that's still very present.
Yeah, we hear you. Alyssa, you currently have an accommodation to help you manage the impact of your symptoms of MS. How did you work that out? How did you work out what you needed, and how the accommodation? How does it bring your own best self to work?
So I guess I'll say for me, COVID actually was a great time because it helped me realize that working remotely helped immensely with with some of my main symptoms, which is fatigue. And when I say fatigue, some people are like, oh, I get tired too. It's not the same thing. It's like bone crushing, like feel like I'm in a lead suit, can't get out of bed fatigue. So during COVID, I realized that working remotely and being able to step away from micro breaks, or being able to step away, you know, maybe during my lunch, and instead of eating lunch, just lay down for 45 minutes and then come back to my work and have that flexibility, I suddenly wasn't struggling as much with my fatigue and the burnout. So when we came back from, you know, like when we came back with the return to office, I realized like I need an accommodation. I need to be able to do this to manage my symptoms. Otherwise, when I do get overly fatigued or my symptoms, or overly stressed, my symptoms will cause me to potentially either miss days completely or be out completely. So if I mismanage it, it will end up being worse for the business. So fortunately, I had the discussion with my manager. Again, I'm in a very inclusive environment, very open environment, and very supportive environment in my current role. So my manager and next level manager were 100% on board with me requesting the accommodation. So I do work remotely. And I will say, if I do need to be on site for something important or travel for something important, and I can and will do that. But I do know that it will take me a day or two, you know, if after travel or after coming on site, I might be extra fatigued or might need to move things around in my workload. So I have that accommodation. I went through the process, and which was not straightforward, or it should have been straightforward, but it was, I would say, challenging a little bit to navigate. And because of that, I took the efforts to help streamline the process for our US colleagues. So I did work closely with HR Shared Services last year, and we actually created an entire new website with the how-to guides, with, you know, what managers should expect, what employees should expect, the types of medical documentation that'll need to be submitted. So the whole process was laid out, you know, just to help other employees navigate the same thing.
It's wonderful to hear, and I've heard your colleague talk about this particular project that you were involved with. So the impact, I think, will be far-reaching, Alyssa. High five to you. Absolutely wonderful. Any words of advice to individuals who may be a little doubting about themselves, or whether to share information about their disability? You know, what sort of advice would you give anybody, not just somebody working for your business, but more broadly than that, about the courage to make the ask?
Yeah, I'll say it, like you said, it definitely takes courage, because there still is that fear and that stigma around it. But for me, it was completely freeing to lift the mask and take it off. It actually made me feel like a more sense of belonging, because I wasn't hiding anymore. So while it is scary and you really can't control how others react to, you know, you disclosing or you asking, the only thing you can control is what you do. So if it will make you feel, like I said, for me, it was freeing. If it will make you lift that weight off your shoulders, then don't be afraid to shine your light. Because I think it's in the differences that make, you know, Merck the innovative place to work. So
Yeah.
that would be my advice to people. Like, don't be afraid. For me, I choose not to have a victim mentality. I choose to see things positively, or see things as opportunities when I am faced with, you know, something that's difficult. I tend to face them head on and push through it. And, you know, some people find that annoying, or, you know, I think the term is like, I forget, something with optimism. Like, it's like sometimes overly optimistic, but I don't care. That's how I choose to see things. And it's helped me navigate very difficult and hard situations.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear. What's that expression you use about MS being a thief? Remind us.
Ah, yes. MS is a thief, but I choose not to be a victim. So MS can steal your joy, can steal the person that you were before diagnosed. MS steals your mobility sometimes. It can be a thief of many things, but I'm not a victim. I choose not to be a victim. I choose to find the good in it and the positive in it. And, people be like, but you have MS. And it's like, no, I have MS, but it doesn't have me. That's the one thing I always say. And I've found out, I found such a community. So I work with outside organizations. I work with MS for MS, a nonprofit. I work with Adaptive CrossFit. I'm actually the 2-time reigning world champion for the neuromuscular minor adaptive CrossFit. So I work, with these organizations to help bring shed light on not just at work. I do it outside of work as well to bring all these things to the forefront and to the light, and that disability isn't a bad word. It's just we have differences, just like everybody has differences that makes them the unique people that they are.
Wise words. Alyssa, what about resilience? Your thoughts about the role of resilience. What sort of role does it play in our lives, or managing chronic ill health? And how can organizations support us to build resilience over time?
Oh, resilience, the word of the day every day for me.
Yeah.
I find that, again, like I said, being resilient when things try to knock us down to, find a way to grow from it. That's something that is going to make you a stronger person, a more effective employee. There's so many times where we work on, just even think of it in the Merck sense, right? There's so many times we work on projects, we think, oh, this is going to be a great breakthrough therapy. We're going to cure so many people of X disease. And, 10 years into the project, it's like, nope, it's done. It's cut. It's over. So, and to learn to be like, okay, well, we're just going to pick up and here's the next project. That's resilience, right? That's what you need to be a good employee. And I think that, supporting people is one way. Letting people tell their stories is another way, because the more we talk about it and normalize it, the more resilient our workforce becomes. And it doesn't just help the individual, it helps the company.
And the role that you and your colleagues have played in building communities at Merck is extraordinary. One of the fastest growing communities globally, as well as impairment specific, just extraordinary stuff. And that's through the storytelling and the advocating. Building on that a little bit, Alyssa, what's your thoughts around the role of advocating for your career development, or indeed the career development of others? Because sometimes when we're faced with disability or ill health, our ambition can be thwarted, or we feel that we shouldn't be overly ambitious. What are your thoughts about either the role of networks or organizations in supporting career development?
I would say the biggest thing that I've learned is for managers and employees to have open and honest discussions, and for managers to ask, not assume.
Yeah.
Because just because I have a disability does not mean that I don't have aspirations to do X, Y, or Z. So you still need to have the same conversation you would have with any employee, with an employee with a disability. It's important to treat us just like you would treat other employees. The only difference is, yeah, we might need an accommodation. Yeah, we might need things to be accessible to us and barriers removed. But we still can function and be extremely productive, on par, if not better than other employees. Again, because of, I think, our resilience, because of things that we've had to do in our lives. And I think advocacy and is critical. We need to know what we need to ask for, and we need to not just ask for it at this point. I think it's, demanding it. And I'm extremely vocal about this because, especially for the neuro-inclusive workforce workspace, because I have a son who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. And I don't want to just prepare him for the world. I want the world to be prepared for him. He spends hours a week in ABA therapy, learning how to interact with others, I think it's also important that I and potential employers learn to interact with him as well and meet him in his space. Because I think that's something still that we need to work on, not just at Merck, just in general in the population. So I am very, very open and honest and very loud on my soapbox for things like that. And I will continue to advocate and press and push for inclusive, neuro-inclusive work environments and, adjustments and things that can be made to make sure that we are identifying, hiring, and retaining the best talent at Merck.
Wonderful. And Alyssa, that leads to my next question, which is the children of the future. As you look forward, and you are a beautifully optimistic human being, as you look up and beyond, what do you predict will the future look like in the world of work? You've got skin in the game. You talked about your son, but what do you predict and or hope for when it comes to inclusion?
I think the biggest thing I hope for is that we stop trying to fix people and that we start trying to remove the barriers. So it's the whole old medical model of disability versus the social model of disability. And, you get into the whole curb cut effect that, they cut out curbs to help people in wheelchairs, but it's also positive for, people moving large amounts of stuff, or it's also positive for a mother with a stroller. So you get this huge positive effect because you made something accessible for one group, and the outcome was actually great for multiple. So I'm hoping and predicting that in the future we'll continue to build more accessibility into our systems, into our work environment. And then it'll actually lead to less need for accommodations because things are extremely accessible. But yeah, I'm hoping, and that's the way and the direction in which we move, because doing it now is critical, because neurodivergence is actually becoming more the normal, or at least in the Gen Z. There, I believe it was Deloitte who has a study that's 53% of Generation Z identifies as being neurodiverse. And that's a huge percentage of people, and just continue. I think it's 1 in 6 now, boys that are born are diagnosed with autism. So again, and that's, I think, from the National Institute of Mental Health, that statistic. I just want to make sure people know I'm not just throwing numbers out there and making up statistics. But yeah, so I would hope that, and that would be where in the future that we continue to work on that and make it the norm, that, telling this story, or, people aren't afraid to disclose because they're not afraid that it's going to affect their career development or their opportunities. So that's, I'm hoping that's where we're moving toward.
Wonderful, Alyssa. With powerful leaders like yourself, I have no doubt that you and your contemporaries will just make it easier for companies to do the right thing. So look, my last question is, if you're a leader, an executive sponsor or champion within a business, what advice would you give them who are looking to support people with disabilities?
I think, again, I said, ask, don't assume, have open conversations with them, to do things like, we have reverse mentoring available through Capability Network. Come and join one of those cohorts. We're talking about how to approach conversations, how to stimulate the conversations is one of the topics that we cover. So if you're unsure or not sure, ask, don't assume, or, come to the Capability Network, and if you need advice. So that would definitely be my number one, piece of advice.
Wonderful. It's a remarkable scheme. I know it well. And those companies who do choose to introduce, whether it's informal or formal, those reverse mentoring schemes, there's a beautiful win-win. on both sides. So yeah, wise words. Alyssa, as ever, it's been a real joy to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your own golden nuggets. And I know our listeners will take so much from this conversation. Thank you for being you.
Thank you for having me.